I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spikepit, a rockin' RPG podcast. Strap in and enjoy the ride. So what is this DMG that we hear about, the Dungeon Master's Guide? Is it any good? Well, I'm going to try and answer that question in this video. As always, old Spikepit can only talk in terms of his own findings. So I'm going to give you my personal opinion, a little bit of history around the Dungeon Master's Guide in my D&D. This book is for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. If you're a fan, you'll be familiar. Lovely cover. I do like some of this epic artwork that the wizards pay out for. It's the first Dungeon Master's Guide I've ever purchased, and only the second that I've owned. I had the 2nd edition AD&D DMG for a little while. A friend gave it to me when I was much more into wargaming, so I didn't hang on to it. I kept my player's handbook for 2nd edition AD&D, but never I glanced through it, pretty much like I glanced through the 1st edition. Now, 1st edition AD&D has got a big following. People have got a fond place for it in their hearts. As kids getting into the hobby, a whole raft of players would have spent their hard-earned pocket money or their allowance going out and picking up the book. So it's all wrapped up in nostalgia. But for me, I remember we played a strange blend of D&D where there was a bit of AD&D, there was a bit of basic, and it was a bit of a mess. But you know, we were kids, we were just having fun, we didn't know any better. Whenever I picked up the DMG, I could see there was a lot of interesting stuff in there, but I didn't really know what to do with it. Gary Gygax had used quite a lot of flowery language that in the hobby we call Gygaxian. Gygaxian writing. And yeah, there was loads in there, but the layout was difficult, and just to my young eyes it looked a bit of a mess and it was a bit overwhelming. I was happy enough with my Mensa Basic, the set that came out in 1983, and that was divided into 2 books. You had the Players and the Dungeon Master's book, and that's what I'd used for all these years. And then getting back into the hobby around about 2015 with the release of the new edition, I had a hankering for playing some role-playing games again, and a lot of my board gaming had been going towards things like Descent and games that tried to capture the role-playing feel, but they were kind of failing, and I'd stayed away because I thought that, you know, there was so much prep and trying to get a group together for an RPG all seemed a bit of a nightmare. And then I picked up the starter box, and well, in fact I was given it, and my brother and my son decided to get me in, and I just started up a group, and I've been having a whale of a time. And as you do, I moved away from the starter box and picked up a few of the hardbacks. I started out with the Player's Handbook. Then I think in fairly quick succession I picked up the Monster Manual and the DMG, and then started down the long and winding road of acquiring more and more of these hardbacks. I've really stopped buying them in the main now. I've got way too many to get through, and if I'm honest, I'm finding them a little bit samey. at this point, but each to their own. I'm not particularly good at running published material, but I will do some videos talking about some of the books I have got and how I do use them. And if you're somebody that maybe struggles with some of these massive books, I mean, there's so much stuff in them, and there is some good ideas. We can talk about how I use them and how I approach them and try and get my money's worth. But I digress. Today we're talking about the DMG. Now, there is loads of stuff in here. I quite like the introduction. I find it pretty inspiring. Explains to you just these big principles of gaming. I also like the introduction in the player's handbook, and there are parts of the book that I think get skipped over, and that's a shame. I think that's a shame. Part 1 of this book for me is a bit of a disaster. It's all the stuff that was stopping me from getting back into RPGs. This building a big world, creating a multiverse. I mean, man, I wouldn't know where to start with a multiverse. Creating the world as well. That's enough. That's too much. I pick a place, pick a start location, get a rough idea, say, of 30-40 miles around it, and then just sort of spiral out from there. If the campaign just crashes and burns, it doesn't matter, nothing's lost. So that advice is in here too. Start off small, but then it gets lost in loads of detail. It doesn't get lost. I get lost. More accurately, I get lost in all that. Chapter 2, the multiverse, I basically skipped it. I picked out a couple of things like the Feywild and the Shadowfell, and I had a little bit of a closer look at them. But all that stuff, if you're somebody that procrastinates or you get a little bit anxious about running games, you can go down a real rabbit hole trying to create this big world. And I wouldn't have put this at the front of the book. I'd have to say I wouldn't have done that. I'd have I think I'd have maybe just gone through some more basic stuff and got people warmed up a little bit, rather than boom, hitting them. Oh, create a multiverse. I don't know. Then part 2 talks about creating adventures. There's loads of stuff in there. I quite like chapter 3. It did sort of give me a couple of ideas about structures, talking about the structures of adventures, and it kind of it codifies it a little bit, gives you a method to follow. There's plenty to inspire you, but this is a guide and something. It's not the sort of thing I think that you just read from cover to cover. It is a reference, because you would just be overwhelmed if you try to take it all in. It would blow your mind. It talks about different types of adventures, creating encounters, and moves then into non-player characters. I quite like this as well, particularly the inspiration it provides, and sort of once again some structures for creating villains. Now sometimes we've probably all done it, fallen into the villain tropes. You just take somebody from TV and you kind of recreate them in your D&D world. This has got some sort of random tables and inspiring bits and bobs that perhaps get you to think up something new. But there's loads there. It talks about villainous class options. I'm not a massive class options kind of guy. I don't so much need rules for that. If that's something we want to do, I just sort of reskin things. So a villainous class option, I mean, what do you put? You just take one of the standard classes. I'm a big fan of basic 5th edition, and you've got the 4 archetypal classes: fighter, cleric, thief or rogue, and they've got a wizard in there. So if you can't have one of them villains, yeah, perhaps I should look at this. Let's just have a look at this quickly. I can't imagine what it is. Okay, right. So it's yeah. So it's a death domain for the cleric, a paladin oathbreaker. Yeah, I've pretty much taken that stuff out of my game. So yeah, that's why I'm not familiar with it. Let's get back on track. Highlands. Now Highlands have sort of been. They don't feature so much in this version of D&D as they did when I was younger. We never used them massively as kids, and it seems that when you listen to a lot of guys over in the States and they're talking about how they used to play in their youth, they seem to hire up a whole big group of folk, like a small force, and head off to do adventures. But it's not really something we ever did. But I have since done that a little bit more, getting into the hobby again, and I quite like the idea of Highlands. Especially currently I'm running a game in the jungle, and it seems like it would be a really good idea for the adventurers to get together some porters and some sort of draft animals, perhaps some like domesticated dinosaurs would be fun, and use them in the game. So I think the Highlands and stuff has been downplayed a little bit, and I'm working on a bit of a 5e hack, and I'm going to bring them in and take some of the classic kind of rules from BX, where you're kind of making reaction rolls and you're using loyalty for your Highlands and hench people. I actually think the psychic rules that have come out for 5th edition fairly recently are going a little bit more in that direction in terms of like henchmen, and I quite enjoy them. I enjoy it's a couple of pages at the end of the Essentials book. Right, then we get into adventure environments. Quite a lot of tables. That's page 99 starting on. So it deals with basically your two main environments, dungeons and your wilderness. So it deals with dungeon hazards, dungeon features, mapping dungeons. It's got some pretty standard kind of random tables to help you to get you started designing an adventure and coming up with the environments. They're all right. I mean, you don't need to buy this book for that. I mean, it's all over the internet, that sort of random table stuff. I'm a big fan of Maze Rats, and the good thing about Maze Rats is not a lot of pages. It goes in my DMing bag. Back in the days when we used to play face to face, and I would actually travel to a game and see real people rather than talk to a screen and get myself thoroughly fatigued by the whole online gaming experience, which I don't know if anybody else is feeling that now. Obviously a lot of people, they only ever play online, and perhaps that suits them, but I'm finding it comes a little bit hard for me playing with kids as I do. I play with my family, and yeah, so we've got like, half of the group is face to face, half of the group is online, and I've got to say I'll be glad to get back to normal on the gaming, and obviously in life in general. COVID is not fun, folks. It is not fun at all. I've been lucky, but there you go. So this, yeah, so dungeon hazards, then the wilderness. It's got talks about travel montages or doing an hour by hour approach. Survival. We started off quite happy with all the overland travel and the survival aspects of gaming in the jungle and running in the jungle, but I think my group's getting a bit tired of it now, I need to swap things up. If you're going to do travel and wilderness stuff, I would caution against doing it for too long. It's like anything, you can have too much of it. Then it gets into settlements and mapping settlements. Yeah, I wouldn't advise mapping out settlements and big city adventures like that. I like the idea of keeping things a bit more abstract, a little bit more goosey-loosey, not too many NPCs. Otherwise, in no time at all, and this is something I found a little bit with Port Nyanzaru. It's fun, but once people start spending a little bit of time there, it can get really unwieldy. So I would have liked to have seen some advice in there, maybe giving you some options if you don't want to go for the full settlement map out idea. Then there's underwater and the sea and flying adventures, and then there's quite a lot on traps. I can never remember their sort of thoughts on traps, but really it's sort of examples, sample traps. I'll tell you what, if you're short of funds, I think you could put your money elsewhere. There's nothing out and out wrong with this book, but I don't feel that I've got the use out of it. I haven't really, I've probably had my money's worth, but it doesn't come anywhere close to the Monster Manual or the Player's Handbook in my mind for the bits that I like about it. And admittedly, quite a lot of this type of stuff I've got in my imagination, my memory from years of playing. As a new player, you would probably get more from it. But at the same time, as a new player, I can't help but think it might be a bit overwhelming. I'd have liked to have seen some more hints and tips, really, not just content. Perhaps a little bit more theory. There are tips. Just looking at downtime activities. Once again, they put downtime activities in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and I actually like some of the ideas they approached there. Do you need this in the DMG? I don't know. Perhaps you do. Perhaps you do. But running a business, we're adventurers. Do we really want to be running a business? Carousing, yeah. Building a stronghold, yeah. Maybe I'm a little bit too harsh. There's a load on treasure and magic items. I just skip it because I like to make up my own stuff for that. I like to do treasure on the fly, and I like to make up magic items. And I tell you what, there is a bunch of that in here. It goes from page 133 to page 232. So that's treasure and magic items. Big part of the game, but I feel like it's super dependent on your setting and the world that you're playing in. So 100 pages of that in my book, no, that is a thumbs down from me. I'd rather just see a treasure book or a magic item book, a different supplement. Have the rules and explain concepts, but endless lists of kind of fairly generic magic items. And I'll tell you something, the magic item cards, picked them up because I thought my son might like them. Loads of generic art, loads of repeated art on the cards. I can't recommend that. I can't recommend that product, I'm afraid. I wish I'd just kept to writing stuff on index cards and giving it out to my players. The other thing about that is, whilst I'm writing it out, if I did take an item from somewhere, or I just really haven't used these, I just make them up. But if I was gonna use one from here, what I'd end up doing is I'd copy it onto an index card. As I was writing it, I'd probably end up editing it and changing it, and then I'd give it to the player. Yeah, so I don't like to be critical, but I would say it's my least favourite part of it, and them cards, they were a stinker, because I thought I'd get some cool art, and it was not the case. Alright, good idea, nicely made, everything else, kind of do the job, but I thought, I basically got them for my son, because I thought he'd like all the cool art, and it was just loads of duplicate, generic stuff. So, for example, there's just one picture of a potion, say, and then all the different potions have got the same picture, same illustration. So that was penny pinching. Chapter 8, running the game. Talks about table rules, so it gives you some guidance, setting out your expectation management. I think that is important. When you've got a group, what is it that you expect from the group about, turning up for sessions? What's your policy on mobile phones at the table? That sort of stuff. I don't think there's anything about a session 0. Yeah, nothing about a session 0, which seems like that would have been a good idea to have that in there, talking about, all the world building at the front of the book. Well, they could have talked about involving your players in that, and all right, I'm nitpicking. Now, following on from that is probably my favourite part of the book. It's the roll of dice and using ability scores, because this gives you real insight into what the designers are trying to achieve with the game. It gives you some pretty solid guidance on all that stuff, and you can really see how the ability scores in D&D are still like clutch to the design. Everything really does come down to them ability scores. Don't get distracted by the skills and proficiencies and things like that. Really, it still comes back to the ability scores. I'd like to see that a little bit more in your face. And the rules variant that we'll come to later is where you do away with, there is a rules variant where you do away with skills and you use the ability scores, and you just have your proficiency in the various ability scores. So when I hack these basic rules, that's what I'll be using. So you will have proficiency. Say you were playing a rogue, you'd have proficiency in dexterity, perhaps, if that's what you wanted, and you'd have proficiency in something else, say intelligence. That gives me a little bit more of a feel of the game I used to play, and I just think it's a bit simpler, and maybe encourages people to sort of internalise their characters a little bit more, so they're not looking at the character sheet quite so much. I think it's probably better for beginners, because you can look at all that list of skills when you're starting out, and that can seem a little bit overwhelming. I know it sounds a bit questionable, and why don't you just play a different version? Well, this is why, because I like the engine of 5e, this dice rolling, when to roll dice, when not to roll dice. It gives you advice about setting difficulties, which abilities to use for which tasks in the game, and when you boil all this down, RPGs, D&D, the DM sets a scene, he asks the players what they want to do, they describe it, and then it's back to the DM. So you've got to have a grasp of the roll of the dice and the roll of the ability scores, and if you've got that, you're well on your way. You've got to be 80% there. So I thought that was pretty good. Talks about advantage and disadvantage using it. So like it says, it's the chapter on running the game. Then we get to inspiration. Well, let's just move on, because no love for inspiration. I like the idea of what they tried to do, but for me it just seems tacked on and doesn't work. There's a game just come out called Beowulf, which is like it uses 5e. It's like a 5e hack, and it's got some duet play. and you've got these much more mythical kind of heroes, or one player, one DM, and there is an inspiration mechanism that looks pretty interesting. So I need to look at that a little bit more, and once I've played that, I'll probably talk about it in a future video. But as it stands, not a fan of inspiration, and nobody plays it rules as written either. People use it as a re-roll, and really that wasn't the intention. Arguably, a re-roll is a bit more useful, because you're jumping through hoops to get inspiration, and all it's giving you is advantage on a dice roll. So you've got to, before you do something, you've got to say, oh yeah, I'll spend my inspiration. It's just lackluster. And then you just roll two rubbish rolls, two low rolls, and it's nothing, not very notable, not very heroic. And I think that's why people use a re-roll. At least with a re-roll, you can turn something that's gone badly wrong and make it work out, or give you another chance. And of course, you're saying, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that if you get two good rolls, well, you'd have passed anyway, you know. So you roll a 17 and an 18, say, because you spent your inspiration. Well, it was like, what a con. What a con. Then it sort of talks about social interaction, some of the other pillars of D&D, tracking, and then all your sort of edge case stuff. Another rule in there that they've put in that I don't really like, I think it's contentious, is the whole business of madness. Tricky one. I think you could get yourself into all sorts of trouble with madness and insanity and questions of mental health. I think I'd rather avoid that in my games. Really tricky to do as well, and I just think you can offend people and cause offence so easily. So I'll steer clear of it. There was two versions of it in here, and if it was something you wanted to use, there was like madness light, and then that was just really around your charisma roll. It was quite simple. And then there's this other kind of long and involved method that's much more like Cthulhu, where you've got to kind of track where you're at with it, and where you're sort of basically where your sanity is. Nah. Experience points. It doesn't give you much guidance on what to do with experience points, because I think it wants you to go with the idea of experience for monsters. It talks a little bit about milestone experience in there. It's a bit of an afterthought. It's a couple of paragraphs. They revisit it in Xanathar's Guide, I think it is, or one of the other books. It also talks about level advancement without XP, and I tell you, I've had an absolute nightmare with this. XP is the bane of my life, and I think I've just overcomplicated it. I think I'm going to go back to XP for treasure, and to kind of keep things going along at a nice pace, I'm going to go with 1 silver piece equals 1 XP, and I'm going to give that a try. The thing I like about it, it's super simple. I'm not going to forget it. It means that people are less likely just to go around feeling like they've got to kill stuff all the time. So I'm going to give that a try and see how we get on. The milestone thing just hasn't really worked out for me. I think it's fine. I quite like how the Black Hack does it, where you go on an adventure. So you sort of get a point for more or less turning up and playing. Then you get a point if you defeat something. You know, there's it's just small numbers, and the amount of points you need goes up a bit for each. It kind of doubles each time as you go up levels, and it was fine. But keeping with tradition and not overhauling this so it's unrecognisable, I thought, well, if I just plump for XP for treasure, that's pretty traditional. I can tone it down a little bit by using silver so we can progress faster. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that. Wow, that was me going down a bit of a rabbit hole. And then like the last bit is another part I quite like, which really is what they call the Dungeon Master's Workshop. It's basically all the crap they couldn't decide on and stuck in the back of the book. But I quite like it. It's variations for the skills. I mean, a criticism I do have for D&D is it's in a bit of a tricky situation. It's a big company. They're trying to be all things to all men. You get endless variants and optional rules, and probably for people that are new to the hobby, that can, well, for anybody, or what am I talking about? You know, it can be kind of confusing because you're not really nailing your colours to the mast. But people who play RPGs, they like to tinker. So it's nice to have some of these optional rules. It shows a little bit of the designer's thinking as well. This is where I found the rule for messing with proficiencies. But there's, I think, 3 versions for dealing with proficiencies. You've got ability check proficiency, background proficiency, and personality trait proficiency. It talks about hero points. It talks about honour and sanity. Oh, yeah, here's the sanity rules. Yeah, that was different to madness. Sorry. And then adventuring options. So this is to address the folk that think that, oh yeah, healing, that's way too fast. We want it like back in the day. So slower natural healing, or variants for rest. So you've got 2 settings. So you've got epic heroism, which means you're using shorter rest. So a short rest drops from an hour to 5 minutes, and a long rest, instead of being like overnight 8 hours or 6 hours, it drops down to 1 hour. So, you know, it's epic and heroic. And then they've got something they call gritty realism, which takes a short rest, makes the short rest 8 hours, and a long rest becomes 7 days. Now, depending on where you sit with what hit points are, or what sort of a feel you want, you just pick a rest variant that suits you. I'm probably going to stick with the core idea, the short rest of an hour. I might speed that up. That's a funny. That short rest is a bit funny in play. So I'm probably just going to end up with a combination of epic heroism. So the short rest gets shorter and the long rest stays as it is. I vacillate on this one because I do think, yeah, you know, maybe you should take a bit longer to rest. But what can end up happening there is it can just sort of like bog down the session and slow down the game. And, you know, it is more realistic, but it's all right on paper. But in practice, it's just, I've tried it and it just gets a bit tedious. I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. This is just my personal opinion. I find that real slow healing just gets a bit tedious, and you have to kind of keep stopping, and you lose momentum. It's horses for courses. You've got to go with what you want, and at least, you know, they're putting ideas into this book. This is another chapter that I quite liked. Then sort of edge cases like explosives, gunpowders, alien technology, plot points. Don't even know what plot points are. And then sort of different combat actions to make your combat a bit more involved. massive damage, cover rules, lingering injuries. So you've got lingering injuries, which we thought about doing because I wanted to see an evolution of characters. The characters, so you don't just keep getting knocked down, get up, knocked down, get up, and you're fine. I thought it'd be good to try. I've been talking about it for months, but it's just one of them things that we forget. We're so used to, like, a character goes down, you make your death saves, you do your healing, whatever. Maybe you die, and maybe you don't. And if you get up, you're back at it, none the worse for wear. So I would like to see the sort of development of a character and build that story up through lingering injuries, but it just hasn't happened. But that's my bad. I put my hands up to that. And then it finishes out with creating monsters. You know, there's no way I'm doing this. There's what is there? It's good if you like all this. 1, 2, 2.5, 4.5, 5, 6 pages, and they're dense. I mean, 6 of those and a bit for designing a monster. I just my tip would be take a monster that's near to what you want and then just make a couple of modifications, reskin it. There's not enough hours in the day for creating monsters from scratch like this. It's a 20-step process. Maybe if you're publishing them and you want to put them up on a DM's Guild, you need to do that. I don't know. Quite a cool list of monster features, however. So when you're hacking your monster and reskinning, go through some monster features. Oh yeah, you know, nimble escape. Let's have nimble escape. You know, increase the monster's effective AC and effective attack bonus by 4. You know, so it's an A to Z of monster features, 2 pages. Then it talks about creating NPCs. You've got an NPC features table. Creating spells, creating magic items. That'd have done me. They could, if they'd just put creating magic items, a couple of sample ones, and not reams and reams of it. I don't need it. Modifying a class. So modifying a class lets you understand the design process. Then that way you can sort of like approach it confidently, and you're not relying on the wizards putting out book after book of character options and class options. It's giving you a little peek behind the curtain, and that's what I like about this chapter. It talks about creating a background. I don't use backgrounds. I've got rid of them. And then we're into the appendices. You've got random dungeons, creating random dungeons, and yeah, this is all just grist for the mill. I've often thought it might be an interesting exercise just to sit down and make a totally random dungeon. I mean, there's pages of it, furnishings, containers, books, monsters, pages of it. I think it'd be a fun exercise, but I don't really design my dungeons like this. I'm in favour of a 5-room dungeon. And then you've got monsters by challenge rating. Yeah, not interested. I like monsters by environment. Challenge ratings. Some people love them, find them really useful. Myself, I like the metric of hit dice and the sort of damage output, and then I just eyeball an encounter. If I'm building an encounter, I rarely build an encounter, because if you're setting up like a point crawl or hex crawls, or you're designing locations, I like them to sort of have the amount of monsters or creatures that seems right for the situation. If the party go there and you know they're powerful and they want to destroy it, let them. It doesn't need to be a deadly threat. And likewise, if it's a dragon's lair and a bunch of idiot first level characters decide they want to go in there and take on this beast of a creature, then they're going to get killed. So not one for balancing, and I think really that's what CR is all about. That's if you want to do the balanced encounter thing, and that's not me. So yeah, a little bit different. I'm sorry if that seems perhaps a bit critical. It's just a bit of a, I'm going to take it or leave it. Nothing, not really anything out and out wrong with it. Just a bit much, a little bit much for me, but your mileage may vary. If you like my approach and this is the sort of thing you want to see more of, like and subscribe, and I'll try and get some videos recorded. And that, as they say, is a wrap. Big thanks goes out to you, the listener, for taking a bit of time out of your day to listen to old Spikepit. Take care, and I'll catch you later.